You can always tell. Not by the scars, not by the stories they share at dinner parties, not even by the sadness. You can tell by the way they pause before they answer a question. There's this half-second delay, almost invisible, where their eyes do something most people's don't. They measure. They calculate how much truth this moment can hold. And then they give you just enough to keep the conversation comfortable. But never the whole thing. Never the full weight of it. If you've ever sat across from someone like that and felt like they were somehow both completely present and 1,000 miles away at the same time, you weren't imagining it. That's not distance. That's architecture. And understanding how that architecture gets built might change the way you see the strongest people in your life, including maybe yourself. There's a term in psychology called post-traumatic growth, and I think most people hear that and assume it means someone went through something terrible and came out better on the other side, like trauma is some kind of brutal self-improvement program. But that's not really what it means. What it actually describes is something stranger and more honest than that. It's the phenomenon where people who have survived repeated hardship don't just recover, they reorganize. Their entire operating system shifts. The way they process danger, connection, time, meaning, all of it gets rewired. Not because they chose to grow, but because their brain had no other option. And here's what gets me about this. The people who've been through the most, they're often the ones you'd never guess. They're calm in emergencies. They're the first to notice when someone else in the room is struggling. They laugh easily, sometimes more easily than people who have suffered far less. And that contradiction confuses us. We expect damage to look like damage. We expect pain to make people fragile. But the mind of someone who has survived more than most doesn't work that way. It works in a way that is, honestly, kind of remarkable once you understand the mechanics behind it. Let's start with something your brain does that most people never think about. It's called threat calibration. Every single day, your nervous system is running a background process, constantly scanning for danger, comparing what's happening right now to the worst thing that's ever happened to you. That comparison is your baseline. It's the ruler your brain uses to measure how scared you should be in any given moment. Now, for someone who grew up in relative safety, a hostile email from a coworker might register as a genuine threat. The nervous system spikes. Cortisol floods in. The whole body goes on alert. But for someone who once had to navigate real, physical, survival-level danger, that same email barely moves the needle. Not because they don't care, but because their ruler is longer, their scale is wider. They've already survived the thing most people only imagine in their worst-case scenarios. This is why survivors often seem unshakable. It's not bravery in the way we romanticize it, it's math. Their brain has already done the comparison and decided this current thing isn't the threat that deserves a full response. And that recalibration, that widened scale, it doesn't go away. It becomes permanent architecture. But here's the part that's less talked about. That same recalibration that makes them calm in a crisis, it also makes ordinary life feel strangely flat sometimes. You know that feeling when you come home from a long trip and your apartment looks the same, but somehow feels different? Like the proportions shifted while you were gone? Survivors live in a version of that feeling more often than they'd ever admit. The world after survival can feel like a movie set. Everything looks right, but the weight of it doesn't match. A birthday party feels performative. A Sunday morning feels thin. Not because they're ungrateful, but because their nervous system was tuned for a different frequency, and regular life sometimes plays at a volume they can barely hear. There's a neuroscientist named Stephen Porges who developed something called polyvagal theory, and it explains this beautifully. Your vagus nerve, this long wandering nerve that runs from your brainstem all the way down to your gut, it essentially controls your social engagement system. It decides whether you feel safe enough to connect, to laugh, to let your guard down. In people who've survived chronic stress or repeated trauma, that system often gets stuck in a kind of halfway mode. They can function, they can smile, they can be incredibly warm and present. But underneath that warmth, there's a part of their nervous system that never fully stands down. It's like a soldier who came home from war but still sleeps with one eye open. Not because they want to, because their body hasn't gotten the memo that the war is over. And I think that's the part most people miss when they interact with survivors. They see the competence, they see the composure, they might even admire it, but they don't see the cost of it. The energy it takes to maintain that steady presence when your internal alarm system is still scanning every room you walk into. The quiet exhaustion of translating between the world you live in now and the one your body still believes it's in. Here's something else that happens in the minds of people who've survived a lot. Something genuinely fascinating. Their relationship with time changes. Most people experience time as this relatively smooth, forward-moving thing. Monday leads to Tuesday. This year follows last year. There's a general sense of continuity. But for someone who's been through major disruptions, time often doesn't feel linear anymore. It feels layered. The past doesn't sit behind them in a neat timeline. It sits underneath them like geological strata, and certain sounds or smells or even lighting conditions can cause an older layer to suddenly surface, not as a memory exactly, but as a full sensory experience. The body remembers what the conscious mind has filed away. This is why a survivor might suddenly go quiet at a restaurant for no apparent reason. It might be the song playing, it might be the angle of the afternoon light, it might be absolutely nothing anyone else could ever identify, but their nervous system just time traveled, and now they're managing two realities at once: the present one, where everything is fine, and the past one, where it wasn't. They do this so seamlessly that you'd never even know. There's also something worth talking about when it comes to empathy. People who've survived significant pain tend to develop a very specific kind of emotional intelligence. Researchers sometimes call it earned empathy. It's not the kind of empathy you learn from reading about other people's experiences. It's the kind you develop because you've been in the dark yourself and you know exactly what it sounds like when someone is pretending they're fine. Survivors pick up on micro expressions, tiny shifts in vocal tone, the barely perceptible moment when someone's smile stops reaching their eyes. They notice because they had to. Reading people wasn't a soft skill for them. It was a survival skill, and it stays sharp long after the danger is gone. But here's the paradox, and honestly, this one surprised me too. The same sensitivity that makes them extraordinary at reading others can make it incredibly hard for them to let others read them. Survivors are often the people who hold space for everyone else's pain while keeping their own locked in a vault. Not because they're trying to be strong, but because vulnerability for them was once genuinely dangerous. Letting someone see the full picture meant risking being hurt in the exact place they were least defended, so they learned to give warmth without ever fully opening the door. And that pattern, that generous but guarded way of connecting, it becomes so habitual that they sometimes don't even realize they're doing it. If you're someone who's been through more than your fair share and you're watching this, I want to say something that might sound simple, but I think actually matters. The way your brain works now, the hypervigilance, the emotional depth, the strange flatness that sometimes follows beauty, the way you can hold space for someone else's breakdown while your own chest feels tight, none of that is broken. That's your mind doing exactly what it was designed to do in response to what you lived through. It adapted, it reorganized, it kept you here. And the people around you who say things like, "You're so strong," or "I don't know how you do it," they're not wrong, but they're not seeing the full picture either. The strength isn't a personality trait. It's an architecture your brain built under pressure. And it's okay to acknowledge that the building is impressive while also admitting that some of the walls were put up in places where maybe now a window could go instead. That's the real invitation of post-traumatic growth. Not to undo what your mind built, but to walk through the structure with new eyes and decide, room by room, what still serves you and what you're finally safe enough to renovate. If this made you see yourself a little differently, or maybe see someone you love a little more clearly, sit with that for a moment before you scroll. And if you feel like sharing what survival has taught you, the comments are open. Sometimes the most powerful thing a survivor can do is let someone else know they're not the only one still standing.